Hi everyone, it's Marla here. I'm the owner and creator behind From Rust to Roses Vintage. This week's video is all about taking those throwaways from the bins and turning them into something beautiful. For project 1, I found this wooden planter at the bins. It was literally falling apart, pieces of wood were missing. There were cracks in some of the supports, and as you can see, the back panel was in pretty rough shape. I decided to mix up some white milk paint, gave everything a thorough cleaning, and then began painting it. I envisioned a white, chippy or distressed planter. I took the back of it, the piece of wood, and sanded it down lightly before painting it. I was pretty sure that the milk paint was going to absorb very quickly because the wood was old and dry, and so I did make sure to give everything 2 coats. Unfortunately, I didn't get any crackle or the chipping that I had hoped for, but it already looked 100% better just being painted white. If you've never used milk paint, you mix equal parts of paint and water and let it set for about 10 minutes before applying. Because I didn't get the crackle or chipping that I wanted, I took out one of my blades and began to distress the piece by scraping some of the paint back. Once I had the paint scraped back, I got out some dark antiquing paste and began to go around the edges of the pickets so it would have more of an aged or vintage look. I decided I wanted to stamp something across the back board. I wasn't sure what I wanted to stamp at first, but I finally came up with a saying that I had seen on a piece of furniture which said, "Bloom with grace." IOD makes these thin mounts that you can put your stamps on, and it holds them in place. And they're very, very useful if you're using lettering because it allows you to line all of the letters up in a straight line. Once the letters were in place, I got out my black ink and inked up the words "Bloom with." Now you'll notice that there's one O missing, and that's because I only have one set of these stamps, so I knew I would have to go back later and fill in the missing O. After the ink had set, I went back and gave everything a coat of DIY's liquid patina. I then cut enough floral foam to fit in the bottom and decided that I would put some green moss on the front of it so when you're looking at the bottom of the planter, you don't see the floral foam. Once it was in place, I began to add bunches of flowers. I wanted to make it really full and beautiful and give it a summer look. Even though I'm anxious for fall, it's still summer. So I did something that I think will get me at least through September. My vision for this planter was to be able to change out the floral arrangement with the seasons. That's part of the reason I painted it white, because that will go with everything. I'm already planning what I'm going to put in there for fall. And I can't wait until time to put in the pine boughs, the red roses, and the Christmas ornaments. Project 2 is this little birdhouse I found at the bins the same day that I found the planter. I love birdhouses and I rarely pass them up, but I wasn't really fond of the print that was on this one, so I got out my hand sander and sanded it down as best I could. And then I began to paint the roof and the trim with Fusion mineral paint in the color Casement. A few months back, I bought an old stool just for the spindle legs, And I had my husband take it apart for me, and then I asked him to take one of the smaller spindles and cut it in half so I could use them as adornments on the front of my birdhouse. I painted the spindles in casement as well, and then I set them aside to dry so I could paint the body of the birdhouse. For the birdhouse, I chose the color Heirloom, which is also by Fusion. I love their mineral paints. They have a built-in sealer and top coat, which makes painting very easy. Generally, I can get by with 1 or 2 coats at most. Once I had the birdhouse painted, I decided I wanted to put some IOD paint inlays on it. I chose black inlays because I thought with the color scheme I had, this birdhouse could go from summer into fall, even into winter very easily. When you're using a paint inlay, whether you're putting it down in wet paint or a top coat, you have to make sure that you get a good layer of that top coat or paint on your project. Then once you have it down and while it is still wet, you take your inlay, and generally I spray mine on the paint side a little bit before laying it down. And then once it's down, I spray it again and then go over it with a rolled up paper towel or something to dab off the excess water. Then you let your inlay dry. It usually takes about 30 minutes, and I don't ever use a heat gun to speed mine up. But once it's dry, you wet it again, wait about 30 seconds, and then start to pull it up. Now you've noticed that as I started to pull that one up, it was resisting a little bit, so I sprayed some more water on it, dabbed it again, and then pulled it up. And then here's the inlay that I put on the other side. Once I was done with the inlays, it was time to start adorning the birdhouse. So I got out my spindles, decided how I wanted to place them on the front of the birdhouse, and then decided it needed some extra trim around the roof and around the bottom. So I got out one of my molds. This is actually, I believe, a cake mold from Wilton, but it works great. And I'm using IOD air dry clay to fill it in. A little cornstarch in the mold helps it to come out easily. As you can see, that came out with no problems whatsoever. I place it on the birdhouse, get it where I want it, and then glue it down, and then cut away any excess. And the paper clay is easy to mold into whatever shape you need it to be. Once my molds were in place, I took some of the casement paint and painted over them lightly. That helps with it not cracking so much. I then decided I wanted something for the roof. So this time I pulled out an IOD trimmings mold with a very wide trim. I think this is trimmings 4. And I used resin instead of paper clay because I wanted the roof to be very sturdy. You can see how quickly the resin sets up because as I'm smoothing it out, it's already turning white. I also made a little resin piece to put between the 2 openings in the birdhouse. I guess this is a 2-story birdhouse or condo. I'm not sure which. And then looking at it, thought it needed a little more color, something to just give it a pop. And of course, I thought of red roses because, again, I would like this to be able to go from summer right into the holidays. And nothing says holiday more than red and green. And nothing says summer more than red, white, and blue. If If you've never done a transfer, they're very easy. You just lay them down on the surface, press it down with your fingers, and then you can either use the stick that comes with the transfer, or in this case, because it was so small, I used my fingernail. And you just rub it and pull back on the vellum sheet that holds the transfer. If you notice any of the transfer coming up on the sheet, you just lay it back down and continue to rub. Once the transfers were on, I went in and painted the roof. I decided at this point that I kind of wanted off-white as opposed to the bright white of the casement. So I gave it a final coat of Fusion Mineral Paint's Raw Silk. Now I'm a little bit of a leather and lace girl. I love Victorian things, I love pretty things, but I also love rustic, outdoor, woodsy type of things as well. So what better to put on the roof of my birdhouse to fill in the gaps between the trimming than twigs from my front yard. As you can see, I'm just using hot glue to put them in. Once I got the gaps on the sides filled in, then I filled in the top of the birdhouse roof with some twigs, and also went down along the bottom trim to put some twigs there. The next thing I did was get out some Spanish moss to fill in the little openings into the birdhouse. There are two of them, so I'm guessing this is a double-decker or a condo, something like that. But I also used skinny twigs out of the yard to replace the perches that were missing when I got the birdhouse, but the holes were there. So I knew that originally it had them. As a final step, I gave the entire birdhouse a coat of clear wax. I knew that I was going to use some dark wax to bring out the detail in the roof, so I always put clear wax on first. It acts as a barrier between the paint and the dark wax, and it allows you to remove as much as you want to if you feel like you got too much dark wax on the project. As I'm watching this, I realized that I probably should have put the wax on before putting on the Spanish moss. I'll try to keep that in mind next time, but it worked out okay in the end. Before putting on the dark wax, I took a soft cloth and buffed back as much of the clear wax as I could. To bring out the detail in the roof, I am using Fusion's aging wax and then buffing back the excess. I'm very happy with the way the birdhouse turned out. It's quite a change from what I picked up at the Goodwill bins. Project 3 didn't actually start out as a project for this video, although I did find this cake server lid at the bins. I'm in a creative community, and our challenge was to find a cake server lid and upcycle it. I decided I wanted mine to look like an actual cake, so I gave it a base coat of Cottage Colors in Veranda, and then I mixed Rose Water by Fusion Mineral Paint with a little bit of water in a squirt bottle and ran that around the edges to make it look like icing dripping down the cake. When I had reached that point, my husband said, "You're filming this, right?" And I said, "No, this is just for my creative group." And he said, "I think you need to make it part of your video." So I decided I would. Once I had it painted, I wanted to put some transfers on it. I had 2 books of transfers from last year's holiday season. I know one of them was Kitschy Christmas. I'm not sure I remember the second one. It might have been Yuletide, or maybe it was even from the Christmas before. Actually, it was. It was from Christmas 2 years ago. But I cut out flowers and I looked at them, and I liked the one on the left the best. It had the nice rose tones that I was going for. Again, when you're laying down a transfer, it's very easy. You place it where you want it, rub it down with your fingers, and then you can use the transfer stick as you gently pull back the vellum sheet to get the transfer to lay down on your project. If you're working over curves like I was right here in the corner, you can just take your scissors and make a couple of cuts, like relief cuts, and that allows your transfer to go down very smoothly. I continued putting on transfers until I had all 4 corners of the lid done. After I'd finished the top, I went back to the book to see if there were more transfers that I could use for the front. And I found these 2 beautiful bouquets here. I apologize that my angle wasn't the best. It's a little difficult to see me putting the transfer on. But you've seen me do the transfers, and you will see the end result revealed in the final project. Of course, every elegant cake has to have some icing piped around the top of it and the bottom. So I got out my IOD molds and my air dry clay and chose trimmings that I thought looked like piped icing. The first one is a rope trim that I use around the top, and I chose a bead trim to put around the bottom. I always use Titebond's Quick and Thick glue to glue on my molds. It holds very well and it dries in a relatively short period of time. I always make sure to use a wet wipe or something like a Q-tip to go along the molds to clean up any excess glue that might have squeezed out. Unfortunately, it was about at this point that my phone died, and so I don't have video of me putting the trim around the bottom, but you can see how I do it. As a final touch, I decided to paint the handle with a beautiful gold metallic paint made by DIY. I was absolutely thrilled with how this cake server turned out. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments. I hope you liked the projects that I did for today. If so, please give me a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel so I can continue to do what I love. Have a great day.